Welcome back to the Bearded Console Gamer, and today we're going to be diving into the future of the Cyberpunk and Witcher franchises, as CD Projekt Red looks to regain its composure in the wake of the disastrous launch of Cyberpunk 2077. In this episode, we'll be breaking down all of the major points from CDPR's strategy update video, which dropped earlier this week. We'll also be talking about the new Cyberpunk 2077 patch and the future of game development at the world-famous studio. As always, if you like the video, please remember to like and subscribe, as we're trying to crack that 100 subscriber mark so that I finally feel loved and validated by the opinion of strangers on the internet. Now, let's just start with a quick recap, because everyone in the world had a hell of a 2020, but CDPR had a real f***er of a 2020. The launch of Cyberpunk 2077 should have been a moment of global celebration and healing. It was, after all, the culmination of almost a decade of work from one of the most celebrated game studios in the world. A studio that lovingly crafted The Witcher 3, which is unequivocally the best fantasy action role-playing game in existence. A studio that, with the Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine expansions, showed the rest of the gaming industry how DLC should be done right. Cyberpunk 2077 was to be their magnum opus, their masterpiece, a gift for the world to rally around when everything else seemed to have gone to shit. So in that sense, I guess it would have been their magnum opus. Cut back to reality, and the launch of Cyberpunk 2077 was nothing short of a woeful mess. It was their magnum jokers. It suffered from numerous bugs, scripting issues, crashes, and countless other audio, visual, and performance problems that were most pronounced on previous gen PS4 and Xbox consoles. Things got so bad that PlayStation pulled the entire game from its online store, and shareholders are now actively suing the company, saying that they were misled by CDPR as to the state of the game prior to release. This, obviously, was less than ideal, and CDPR has been in damage control mode ever since Cyberpunk dropped, feverishly working to get their carefully curated public image of being a good guy developer back on track. And this has borne fruit in the form of multiple patches that have reportedly significantly improved the gameplay experience. We were also treated to a full-blown "I'm sorry that we were bad boys and girls" apology video from CDPR, which was a nice touch, but the video medium of the apology basically gave zero right of reply to anyone who may have had a beef with them. But getting back to it, the latest patch for Cyberpunk 2077 actually dropped just this week, and literally fixed hundreds of issues that were plaguing the game. I mean, look at this changelog. George R.R. Martin's The Winds of Winter could have been shadow dropped in here, and we would never be able to find it. Some key improvements include changes as to how the police respond to a player following the report of a crime, steering sensitivity adjustments, and just a ton of bug fixes and performance optimizations, and generally improvements across the board. However, despite all of that, Cyberpunk 2077 is still a buggy game, and if anything, the massive changes included in the patch notes serve to highlight the sheer number of issues that the game had at launch. But we aren't just here to talk about the new patch and past issues with the game, because just a few days back, CDPR outlined their strategy as to how they're planning to approach game development moving forward. The info came in the form of a video presentation which was chaired by joint CEO of the CD Projekt Group, Adam Kuczynski. Now, Kuczynski covered a whole range of subjects in the 24-minute heart-to-heart, but here's a breakdown of the most important takeaways. From a technical standpoint, CDPR are looking to build on the Red engine, which is the game engine in which both Cyberpunk and The Witcher 3 were built, and centralize the technology so as to allow it to serve both major game franchises at once. So there's going to be an emphasis on preparing technologies, for example, powering NPC routines and player character control that can be adapted for use in multiple games. The studio is also going to start deploying teams of experts, for example graphics developers and software engineers, who will work on both the future Cyberpunk and Witcher games when needed. So they'll basically have leads who are able to switch roles, and it'll be a more dynamic working environment. According to CDPR, the implementation of this more unified approach is going to allow them to begin developing parallel AAA games in tandem starting in 2022. Now, viewers were assured with all this that the ambitious growth was going to be possible while avoiding development bottlenecks and maintaining a more positive working environment for developers, but we'll just have to wait and see whether these words can actually be transitioned into reality. I mean, if we're looking back into the past, CDPR poured a huge amount of time and lots of resources into the production of Cyberpunk 2077, and because of its ambitious nature and numerous other development issues, it's going to go down in history as being one of the worst, or at least most publicly embarrassing, video game launches of all time. What's more, developers had to endure prolonged periods of crunch to get that game ready for its December 2020 launch window. Now, this same company is looking to expand their capabilities to work on 2 AAA projects at the same time, all the while sharing staff between them and trying to avoid delays and crunch. So, I mean, you can paint me skeptical, but I'd love to be proven wrong. And it does seem like CDPR is keen to learn from the mistakes of the past. One of the reasons that Cyberpunk came in for such savage criticism at launch was because the hype cycle for this game began all the way back in 2012 when the game was first revealed. That is a long time for fans to build up unrealistic expectations in their heads. And this wasn't helped by CDPR's protracted and aggressive marketing campaign. Well, there is some good news on that note, because in the presentation CDPR announced that while new projects will be teased early on, that trailers, demos, and full-blown PR campaigns like Cyberpunk's Night City Wire will start significantly closer to the actual launch date of the relevant game. Furthermore, future campaigns are going to showcase footage taken from all platforms that the game is going to be featured on, so we're going to see faithful representations of console gameplay that won't leave players wondering whether this is actually the kind of experience that they're going to get when they go out and purchase the game. On the human side of things, Kaczynski announced that the group was going to take steps to increase team well-being, reduce stress, and prevent burnout. The company is also creating a team of representatives elected by the studio as a whole to share new ideas and feedback with the board in an attempt to break down communications barriers, which were partially blamed for the unfinished state of Cyberpunk 2077 upon release. The group is also going to be aggressively recruiting new talent in a bid to cope with the demands of developing dueling high-budget games. Thankfully, for me at least, Kaczynski reiterated that single-player RPGs are always going to be the core offering of CDPR, with the company looking to continue evolving the genre with future games. We can also expect a ton more content from them outside of games, such as the release of comics, anime, live-action adaptations, merchandise, and basically everything else geared towards expanding their flagship franchise's presence. It also sounds like, despite the serious issues that the game has had since launch, that CDPR is going to continue investing in the Cyberpunk franchise, with an eye towards building it up in the same way that they did the Witcher series and its surrounding media. So we could even see a sequel announced sometime in the future, with a full launch following roughly 8 to 10 years after that point. In all seriousness, it's anyone's guess as to what could happen with the future of the Cyberpunk franchise. The one thing we know for sure, because Kaczynski said it himself during the presentation, is that CDPR are backed away from making their next title a multiplayer-only game. Instead, they seem set to take a more cautious approach, thank God, although Kaczynski did let slip that CDPR intended to bring a multiplayer element to, and I quote, all of their franchises one day. But that's a worry for future you. Let's get back to 2021. Before the year's end, we can expect a bunch more Cyberpunk patches and updates, free DLC content, and, if all goes to plan, the release of the long-awaited next-gen update, which will be coming in the second half of 2021. We're also going to be getting the Witcher Monster Slayer AR game for mobile devices, continued Gwent support, and a next-gen version of The Witcher 3, which, by the way, if you're anything like me, is the piece of CDPR content that I'm the most hyped for. And on that happy note, I'm going to end today's episode. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to subscribe, throw up a like, and hit that notifications bell to stay up to date on all of the biggest news from around the video gaming world.